revenue, et cetera, that results from that hunting related spending in Nevada. So I think a lot of the stuff thus far in terms of economics of rangeland has focused on agriculture with good reason. But of course, recreation is also a really important use of rangelands and a particularly valuable use. And in Nevada, of course, one of the most important recreational activities is hunting. So, this is, I think, when you're looking at a lot of people have emphasized already today during these meetings that, you have to look beyond agriculture for the economic value of these resources. And I think one important component of that is that they offer recreational opportunities. And the people who do those recreational opportunities, as we're going to talk about, I'll talk about today, care about them a lot, value them a lot, and spend a lot of money, spend considerable amounts of money in pursuing them. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is some work. It's joint work. I want to give credit to Alec Bowman, who's kind of the lead author on this. This work kind of came out of Alec's master's thesis, which he defended, I guess now it's 2 years ago, in 2020, August 2020. And after his master's thesis, Alec started working with myself as well as Buddy Borden on the NEAT project. And this work is stuff that came out of those kind of collaborations. So this was supported, myself and Buddy and Tom Harris are all extension faculty. I have appointments with Cooperative Extension, supported by Buddy's NEAT project. And it was done in collaboration with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. And what we've done is we have basically the first estimate of big game hunting related expenditure in Nevada since the 80s. So that's certainly something. It's the first ever estimate of the upland game related hunting expenditures, which are also substantial. We've also been able to decompose this spending so that we have different spending expenditures by species and by class, so by sex of the animals. We break down expenditures by where they occur, so differentiating between expenditures that happen before people leave home compared to ones that happened in transit or near the hunt site. And we also look at the difference in spending between resident and non-resident hunters. So for big game, for example, 10% of the tags in Nevada are allocated to non-residents. So we look at those differences. One other thing we were able to do just by the timing of this project is we're able to look at 2019 versus 2020, and hopefully and be able to look at how COVID-19 impacted hunting in Nevada and hunting expenditure. And then so again, we take this expenditure information, and then we look at how those expenditures translate into economic activity in Nevada at the county level. So we look at how those expenditures then translate into employment, total output, value added, tax revenues, kind of these standard measures of economic activity. So this is an idea of what the big game species are, and this should all look pretty familiar to people. And also these upland game species. These are the kind of most prominent upland game species. And one thing is that, not only is this, these estimates relevant for Nevada, we think there's a couple ways where this study is also going to provide better and more accurate information on hunting related expenditures than anything that's available nationally. So we think that, and we believe this is the case for two main reasons. One is we're the first study, I think, that looks in detail at both the expenditures by the hunters themselves and also their guests. And as we're going to show, guests are a really important part of big game hunting and the expenditures that result from big game hunting. So for example, for Nevada residents, the average big game hunt has 1.5 guests. So for every hunter, there's 1.5 additional people who are going to come along on that trip. They're going to spend money, they're going to buy gear. So we guess capturing guest expenditures is an important contribution for what we're doing. The other thing is that for every big game tag, it's not only the hunt that's going to generate expenditure, there's also going to be scouting activities before the hunt. So from our data, we find that over half of Nevada hunters scout prior to their hunting trip, so scout prior to the season. And we're able to capture the expenditures associated with the scouting trips as well as the hunting. So I think in doing that, we're providing a fuller picture of all the economic activity that results from hunting than previously available in the literature. We also do some stuff where we provide estimates of the number of upland game hunters. This is the first since 2017. We also distinguish, especially for upland game hunting, expenditures related to primary purpose upland game hunting trips, where people go out for the main purpose of upland game hunting, versus people who are going on, say, a big game hunting trip and happen to pack some shotguns and maybe we'll do some upland game hunting, kind of in the process of their primary purpose being big game hunting. So we're able to distinguish between those in terms of, avoid double counting expenditures. Yeah, so we use 3 different data sources for this project. We use administrative data from NDOW. This is going to give us the total number of tags as well as the total number of hunting licenses. So we use this to estimate the total number of big game upland game hunters. We also use NDOW's big game survey. So any big game hunter after the season gets a big game survey. A very high response rate to the survey, over 95%. We're able to use this information to get the total number of effort days associated with each tag. So there's a number of days scouting and hunting associated with each tag. And then we also have, this is what we were involved in, this hunter expenditure survey. So this was conducted in partnership with NDOW. It was conducted for the express purpose of getting expenditure data. And this is what gives us the expenditure data that we're able to use in this analysis. So able to leverage these 3 data sources to hopefully provide a full picture of hunting-related spending in the state. The survey development, we leaned heavily on our partners in NDOW, as well as Kelly Stewart from here and our NRES at UNR, to just understand more about hunting and wildlife. We followed what's called the Dillman method. So we did focus groups, we pre-tested and then piloted the survey before full implementation. This allowed us to kind of get make sure the language was accessible and remove some of the kind of little kinks in the survey. We finally did full implementation last March. So, almost, 10 months ago at this point. And the survey was sent to almost 8,000 hunters. And here's what it looked like. One of the things here, we had about 2,000, over 2,000 completed surveys. So the response rate was 24%. This is excellent. We were very happy with this response rate. There's tremendous survey fatigue. It's been well documented out there in the general public. People are very unlikely to answer surveys, particularly email surveys. And I think this high response rate just speaks to how motivated hunters are and how much they care about their pastime. So we had, a very nice sample size as a consequence of this nice response rate. So anybody out there who did on this call who completed the survey or the big game survey, thank you, because we're really in debt for you. We couldn't do this without the data. Yeah, so here is, this is what our estimates of the effort days look like. There's basically 27,000 big game tags in Nevada every year. And the tag holders themselves spend about 138,000 effort days hunting and about another 55,000 scouting. But then when we count the total number of guest effort days, where we get 1.5 guests for every hunting trip for a resident, but 1.14 guests for every hunting trip for every non-resident. You end up with more guests out there than more guest effort days than tag holder effort days. And in total, you get this number, basically 470,000 days hunting, effort days out there on the landscape for these 27,000 tags. So there's when you count guests and you count scouting and you count the fact that these trips, the average elk hunting trip, for example, for an antlered elk is a week. The average amount of hunt days people spend out there for antlered elk. So you end up with this very large number of effort days. So a relatively small number of tags actually generates a lot of recreational activity out there, and people being out there on the landscape and spending money. You have similar, these are the estimates of effort days for upland game. Upland game, you have, of course, more hunters. There's only 27,000 tags, 27,000 people who have less than 27,000, because some people get multiple tags, are actually out there hunting. We have more hunters for upland game. They spend generally less time out there, and there's fewer guests. So they actually end up spending fewer effort. Our estimate is fewer effort days total in 2020. Less than half compared to big game. Now we look at these are the kind of expenditure for residents. We have I'll show you similar information for non-residents. And look, the big thing is that male animals people spend a lot more money hunting male animals than they do female animals. We can see this here. This is true across the board for deer, for elk, for sheep. A lot of that difference is generated from these kind of one-time expenditures. People are more likely to spend money on taxidermy. People are more likely to spend money on guide services for male animals than female animals. People also, on average, spend more days out hunting for male animals. So there's substantial differences between species. This is for non-residents. These are the total expenditures. So we see the total expenditures are a little bit higher for residents than for non-residents. One other thing to point out is if you look here, almost 95% of the expenditures related to tags are on 3 species. So antelope, deer, and elk. The reason for this, of course, is that the majority of the hunts are for antelope, deer, and elk. So they have hunts like sheep or black bear. There's so few hunts that it ends up translating to a small amount of expenditure. So for example, about 46 of total expenditure is on mule deer hunts. For elk, elk constitutes a little under 8% of the total number of hunts in the state, big game hunts, and it's a little over 16% of total expenditure. So these are like the 3 main species that are driving almost all the economic activity related to hunting in the state. Here's kind of a summary. And I think one of the important things to look at here is that you see, if you look at total tag-related expenditure, it's higher for non-residents, over $1,500 higher. So non-residents are spending more money. But for non-residents, about almost half, like 44% in our sample of their expenditure happens before they even get into Nevada. So they're gearing up and stuff before they leave home. So if you look at expenditures in Nevada, it's actually residents are spending more money for tag-related expenditures in Nevada than non-residents. So this was kind of interesting finding. And I think important when you're thinking about, if this is, if allocating more tags, for example, to non-residents might increase economic activity, there doesn't seem to be any indication that this is going to be a substantial difference. The other thing to point out is we hit this number of almost $81 million in total expenditure related to big game hunts. So there's 27,000 or so hunting opportunities are related to $81 million in spending. So this is a pretty substantial amount of spending related to big game hunting in 2020. This figure, I think this figure is important. It illustrates that, one of the things that we've heard, and this is just tag holders, so this isn't including guests, for example. This is only the tag holder expenditure, but that the median is less than the mean. So like while we have these big numbers of, several $1,000s, for example, for an elk, for a male elk, $6,000 for a male elk, $10,000 on average for a sheep, the averages aren't really representing the typical hunter. The typical hunter is actually spending quite a bit less. So the median is less than the mean, and you can see here that there's a huge mass of hunters here who are spending, on combined scouting and hunting expenditure, in the $300, $400, $500, $600 range. So a lot of these averages are driven by some hunters who are spending a lot of money on their hunts, These are typically people who are hiring guides. This is upland game. These are similar numbers for upland game. We estimate this is about $35.5 million in upland game spending, expenditures related to upland game every year. These numbers are, of course, smaller, quite a bit smaller than the $80 million we get for big game. One thing to keep in mind is a lot of like the expensive one-time purchases, so guide services, meat processing, taxidermy, aren't really significant for upland game when those are big sources of spending for big game. This is again for non-residents of upland game. We get about $3.5 million in total spending. Another thing that we did in the survey is we recognized that, you know, a lot of the expenditure related to the recreational activity of hunting is not associated with a single trip, but rather these big ticket items that you're going to use for multiple trips. So this would be stuff like firearms, optics for your weapons, GPS, off-highway vehicles. So this slide shows, and this is important to note that this sample, this is a percent that purchased the item. This is going to include everybody who we consider to be hunters in Nevada in 2020.
Oh,
so these would be people who...
I'm on, yeah, but I'm unmuted, so. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a question, Kelly? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so what we see is that, so this is the full, these are anybody who's bought a hunting license or participated in a tag lottery. So this is going to hopefully going to catch the full set of, or close to the full population of hunters. We see that, yeah, people purchased a lot of goods related to hunting. You know, in 2020, almost 60% of people bought some kind of piece of clothing for the purpose of hunting. You get down here, about 7% of people bought an off-highway vehicle for the purpose of hunting. So this actually turned out to be the biggest source of expenditure for hunting. So we see here that we're estimating, and this is our conservative estimate to avoid double counting, almost $260 million of expenditures on big ticket items related to hunting took place in Nevada in 2020. The biggest category of this is off-highway vehicles and RVs. So, you know, this number, this represents over $4,000 spending per person. So of course, the typical person is going to spend far less than that, but because some of these big ticket items like RVs and campers, people buy, you know, they're lumpy, you buy them maybe once a decade or so, but then when the people do buy them, there's a substantial amount of money. So we found that actually the big ticket items, you know, this is $260 million compared to $80 million for stuff directly related to the trip. So the biggest category of hunting expenditures are going to be big ticket items purchased before the trip. Here's a quick summary. Again, $81 million for big game, 39 for upland game. Big ticket items, of course, being the biggest category. We find this big difference between species, you know, where people spending a little over $1,000 to hunt a female antelope to over $9,000 for a bighorn sheep. And we find, again, residents versus non-residents. Non-residents spend more, but they spend enough of that money before they leave home that actually you get more spending in Nevada from a resident hunter on average. This is a very quick story. We looked at what happened with COVID, and we found basically there's no effect of COVID on hunting. So there's basically, if anything, there's a little tiny bit more, you know, party size and also spending in 2020 compared to 2019. But these differences are really not statistically significant. So this, of course, I think is to be expected. Of course, hunting opportunities in Nevada are rationed. There's far more people who want to hunt in a given year than there are opportunities available to hunt. So even if some people chose not to hunt because of concerns about COVID, there's always going to be other willing hunters who are going to come in and take those tags. So you know, we're seeing really, and there's really, we're not seeing any difference in expenditure patterns for those people who did hunt. So, you know, hunting is COVID-proof, likely also to be recession-proof, mainly because, you know, these hunting opportunities are rationing, and that there's going to be always more demand than there is supply in Nevada. going to break down by county. And we're going to break this down a bit more. We see the biggest counties in terms of total expenditure are going to be kind of Elko, where there's a lot of people and also a lot of hunting opportunities. And then Washoe, where there's a lot of hunters who are gearing up to go hunt in, parts in like the north and east of the state. So you can see here, this is origin county and destination county. The biggest origin county is Washoe County. The most hunters are from here. Biggest destination county by far is Elko, but also all these counties in the kind of northeast of the state, Humboldt, Eureka, Pershing, White Pine also have a lot of hunting opportunities. And this is, of course, borne out in, in the tags. You can see that like the majority, almost all the elk tags are in this northeast corner of the state, and the majority of hunting opportunities are just concentrated in the northeast of the state. If we look at hunter expenditure, this is before leaving home, while traveling to the site and near the site. Before leaving home, the spending is happening in the big population centers in Clark and Washoe. And then near the site is happening where the sites are, of course, so where the hunting opportunities are in kind of northeast Nevada. And then in transit, it's these counties like here's Pershing County or Lincoln County, where people are going through these population centers to get their hunting opportunities in the northeast of the state. This is upland game. It's a similar picture, except now there's, of course, the hunting opportunities are kind of more spread across the north part of the state with significant hunting opportunities in Washoe. So Washoe, we then get by far the most expenditure. You have not only population of hunters here, but also hunting opportunities here. This is total economic output related to hunting. So this is including both big game and upland game. And the way to think about this information is this would be what would be lost in spending in each of these counties if there were no hunting opportunities available in the state. So hunting wouldn't go away. These numbers are going to be smaller than the total spending numbers, the total expenditure numbers. And the reason for this is that, if there's no hunting opportunities, a hunter in Washoe County isn't going to take all that money that he's not spending hunting or she's not spending hunting and then immediately spend it outside of the state. Some of that money they're not spending hunting is going to be spent on other services, other recreational opportunities in the state. So these numbers are a little bit smaller, or quite a bit smaller than in the total expenditure numbers. But what we see here is that the economic output related to hunting is going to be highest in the states where hunting is concentrated. So of course, these states in kind of the northeast, these counties in the northeast, particularly Elko, but also kind of White Pine and Lincoln, have the most economic output related to hunting. And it's almost $10 million in economic output related to hunting in Elko. You have a similar picture for employment, where the employment number of jobs that are directly tied to hunting, these are jobs that would go away if there were no hunting in the state, is most, is of course concentrated in the northeast, and primarily in Elko. One thing I think that's kind of important about these exercises is that by attributing the spending to where the spending occurs, so we're not overstating the amount of spending that's taking place, I think, in these rural counties, because of course most of the spending takes place before they get there. So even though hunting is an important recreational activity, an important economic activity in these counties, I think its magnitude is important to get right. And I think I have confidence that we're being conservative in these estimates. But what's important to note is that while hunting is significant, it's not 45 jobs in White Pine County, 120 jobs in Elko. This is important, but it's not of the same magnitude as opening a new mining operation or some of these other kind of economic development vehicles that have a lot more, a lot bigger implications for employment. Sorry, I'm kind of going through this quickly, so hopefully there's time for questions at the end. But one thing that we did, I should say, that Alec has done is that we developed kind of the economic contributions of hunting for each county in Nevada. And that's going to be in the report. So please contact me if you want the report. It's going to be published through Cooperative Extension eventually after it goes through the peer review process. But I think we're comfortable sharing these numbers now if you're interested. But so we have this for every county. I'm just going to show you what it looks like for Elko County. First, these are the contributions. So these are what would happen if hunting went away. What's the present, contribution of hunting to Elko's economy in 2020? And this is, of course, it's going to impact employment, this is from big game and upland game hunting. It's also going to impact tax revenues. So there's going to be a fiscal implications of hunting. So we're seeing here that there's about $1.6 million of tax revenue associated with having hunting opportunities. Total for the hunting from Elko County, resulting from hunting. So there's substantial fiscal impacts as well from hunting. One thing we did as well is that in addition to looking at the total contribution from hunting, we also have these results, and these are really intended to be used for policy. So these are saying, what would be the implications if you had 10 additional big game tags of these different species for employment, for total output, and also we've also done this for the fiscal impacts. So this is stuff that you could use then if you were contemplating, if you're contemplating kind of some habitat restoration or some other policy that's going to increase big game opportunities in the future. What is that going to mean then for employment and output in each of these counties? So we're seeing again, if you look at the employment, there's significant but pretty modest implications for increasing the number of tags or reducing the number of tags in a county. And then in terms of total spending and total output, total new dollar spending, it depends on the species. It's 18,000 for antlered elk compared to only about 2,000 for an antlered deer. This difference, of course, is that people spend more money for antlered elk, and people are also more likely to travel into a county to hunt antlered elk. And people coming from outside the county and spending money in the county are going to have a bigger impact in terms of stimulating the economy of the county than people in the county who are residents of the county spending the same amount of money on a trip. So this accounts for like these quite significant differences between species. This is the fiscal impact. So this is the impact on taxes. So you can see 10 additional antlered elk, you're going to get about $3,000, a little over $3,000 total in additional tax revenue. So it's substantial, but of course it's not going to be life-changing amounts of money. And then we did the same thing here for upland game. And the big difference, I guess, is an upland antlered elk. For any of the big game species, the amount of opportunities, of course, is going to be determined by the health of the herd of these different species. So it's going to be a kind of a long process if you want to expand hunting opportunities. We're thinking more for upland game, that you could have more upland game visitors potentially through simply marketing upland game opportunities you have in various counties. So this is what we're thinking, 50 additional upland game days for visitors, whether those visitors are from a different county in Nevada or from out of state, and looking at both the impacts on employment and value added, output, as well as the fiscal impacts. I think these numbers are important because if this is something that, some county in Nevada, Churchill County, Elko was considering in terms of marketing hunting opportunities to increase the amount of upland game hunters, it's good to have realistic numbers about how that's likely to stimulate the local economy and how that's likely to impact county, state, and federal tax revenue. So I think these, hopefully these numbers, we have again, these numbers for every county. Hopefully these can be useful for policymakers when thinking about expanding recreation and expanding hunting opportunities as a vehicle for economic development. Again, here's the kind of summary of the economic activity analysis. Again, the three biggest, in terms of the contribution of hunting, the three biggest counties were Elko, White Pine, and Lincoln. And again, if you look at these response coefficients, the impact of increasing the number of tags, there's big differences across species. So an average across counties is like 19,000 for elk compared to only about 3,200 for male pronghorn. And again, we have these response coefficients for upland game. that are kind of course, then even more modest than for big game. So I think the big takeaways, there's significant economic activity generated by hunting, significant amounts of spending, but that it's still relatively modest as in terms of like the economic development potential for expanding hunting opportunities. It's there and is real, but it's also, I think, it's important to have these accurate numbers so that they can actually gauge against the cost of trying to expand those opportunities. Another big takeaway, I think, that that's going to be really important going forward in terms of the implications of this report is just how much there's so much spending in hunting in Nevada. We had $250 million in terms of these big ticket items, over 80 million for these big game hunts, but so much of it happens before the hunters leave home. So in terms of economic development for rural counties in Nevada, I think the focus should be, rather than under the expanding the number of opportunities, we're seeing as relatively modest impacts, but being able to capture more of the current hunting expenditure in these rural counties, have more of the gear purchase, for example, or supplies purchase closer to the hunting site, has real potential for expanding the economic impact of hunting in these rural counties, simply because so much of the current expenditure happens in these urban centers before people leave home. All right, so that's really kind of all I have. I think I'm a little bit over time, so I apologize. The next step is, this is looking at expenditure related to hunting. The next step is we're going to look at the economic benefits of hunting to the hunters themselves. So how much the hunters, try to put dollar values on how much the hunters actually value the hunting experience over and above how much money they spend on it. And I think these two pieces together, the expenditure side and then the value of hunting the hunters, will give a pretty complete picture of the economic benefits from hunting in Nevada and its potential as an economic development strategy. So again, if you want copies of the reports, please contact me. They're going to be available through extension in the coming months after they go through peer review. And again, we'd like to thank our partners at NDOW and also with Cooperative Extension and Buddy Borden's new project for making this thing possible, making this work possible. All right, well, thank you.